In Dragon Ball Z Movie 5, audiences were first introduced to Cooler, the brother of Frieza. After the defeat of his brother, Cooler sought revenge upon Goku. However, Cooler would be defeated in both of his movie appearances. With that, Cooler departed from the story, only to make brief appearances in video games and specials. However, despite not being a part of the main continuity, Cooler's popularity endured until the modern age of Dragon Ball Super. After seeing fellow DBZ movie villain Broly's reimagining in Dragon Ball Super Broly, fans have wondered what would happen if Cooler had the same treatment. So what if Cooler was rebooted in Dragon Ball Super? Should it happen, and how would he be used? Well, in this video, we're going to discuss that. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Okay guys, so joining me in this video is someone you've seen on my channel in the past, and his name is...
Hey guys, what's up? It's Josh from Dragon Ball Nation here.
So Josh, like I said in the intro, we're going to be discussing whether Cooler should be rebooted in Dragon Ball Super. So what we're going to do here is we're going to break this down into multiple categories. The first category is how we feel about the original character of Cooler from the Dragon Ball Z movies. The next one's going to be, should Cooler be rebooted? And the next one after that is going to be, how would Cooler be used once he's rebooted? So let's start with that first category, Josh, and that is, how do you feel about Cooler, the original Dragon Ball Z movie villain, his movies, and how he was utilized?
Well, for me, Cooler is my favorite villain from the films. I've always liked Cooler. I like his design a lot, and obviously the fact that he's Frieza's brother, which was a big part. I mean, remember how much people were hyped when Frost was coming out? They just liked the fact that it was another Frieza race character, in all honesty. But as far as Cooler and his movies, I mean, I enjoy both the films. I like the first one a lot, and Meta Cooler's a fun, little romp with, some returning characters. But they're definitely not the, I guess, top 5 movies. But in terms of his character for Cooler, I think the main appeal for me is just his design and that he is just Frieza's brother with his own squad. He has his own Cooler force with Salazar, or I guess Thouser, whatever you want to call him, and that crew. So there's definitely parallels from the Ginyu Force and stuff. It is just kind of like an alternate version of Frieza in a way, like before Frost even. So I like that, and I think that he's fairly well developed. I mean, none of these movies have that good of characterization for any of their villains, in all honesty, except for Battle of Gods, really, and obviously the new Broly film. But I think the main thing is just... he's a big hulking bad guy when he's transformed. I even like the design of his introduction with his, I don't want to say fourth form, but
his base form.
What we would say is, yeah, his base form. That's a way better way of saying it, actually. I mean, I even like the colorization there. All the colors are good. Just, I guess it's really a palette swap of Frieza. The colors are swapped in a way, although he has a little bit of blue there. I'm rambling too much about his design, but his final form really is one of my favorite designs of the series. It's nice and simple, but I mean, look, he's in Dragon Ball FighterZ, and that shows that he's a popular character still.
Yeah, I always like the original Cooler, like you said, because he has a really cool design, no pun intended. But in addition to that, I like the fact that Cooler kind of has a justifiable motivation in many ways for what he's doing. After all, Goku, in that version of the story at least, seemed to kill his brother, and they never mentioned King Cold for some reason, but I guess if you want to compare them or lump them all together, Goku and Trunks were the ones who did wipe out Cooler's family, so when he comes for revenge, he wants to show who truly is the most dominant family in the universe, and, the way that he actually goes about doing that, I always thought was pretty cool, and, it's better than what they ended up eventually doing in Resurrection F, which took many of the same elements of Cooler's revenge and then applied it to Frieza, but for me, I feel like the original Cooler version was always better. But getting into the next version of Cooler with Meta Cooler, what did you think about his utilization?
I thought, in terms of just as, I guess, an idea of how to bring a villain back, the whole Big Getty Star was really cool concept, I thought. The whole Meta Cooler army and having that giant core, I thought was a really interesting idea. The movie wasn't as good as the last one. Had a lot of spots with poor animation, but, just overall enjoyment and, fun factor of watching it, I always enjoyed the film. And it's just because I really like Cooler a lot. I thought the design was cool, although it obviously takes after his base form appearance instead of his final form.
Yeah, it would have been cool to see him in his, like, Shredder form.
Well, it might have looked a little weird metal. I mean, Golden Cooler in Dragon Ball Hero looks a bit silly, but the metal design looks really good with the base form. If they did it with his final form, maybe they would have altered the way the colorization would be, but that whole film, it was just a nice little film kind of to expand upon him a little bit more. Not really any more character development, but I mean, I guess it was about the same as Broly's Second Coming in terms of what it really brought to the table in terms of new things. We got to go visit New Namek and all that stuff. That was really cool. And maybe they could have that be in a potential rebooted movie too. But there's not a whole lot to say about Cooler's Revenge, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and fortunately for Cooler's Revenge, it didn't have Goten Trunks fighting the main villain and peeing on his face, you know.
Well, they don't use Goten Trunks anyways anymore, so who cares?
Well, they weren't even alive at the time, which is even better in my opinion. But moving on. So let's get into, I guess, the meat of this conversation then. Do you think that Cooler should be rebooted in Dragon Ball Super?
I think we were talking about this off the air. Even more so than Broly probably would have been a better character to reboot first, but they did Broly and it turned out amazing. So I think Cooler is probably the best option to reboot, and along with another character, which we're going to talk about after this video. I think that Cooler he was already interesting enough. They just need to build upon it in a well thought out film, or maybe a film series. Maybe he can get a trilogy of his own. Because if they were to do a Cooler reboot, I would like to see it as maybe a trilogy or at least 2 films, just like how it was before, you know, with the old school movies. Maybe even have his own villain arc in Super instead of doing a Cooler reboot for movies. I think an arc actually might be the better choice there, to be completely honest with you. Do I want them to do the meta Cooler stuff again? Maybe not, because I think that there's a lot of potential to really expand on Cooler, and, you know, we'll talk about how we'd like to see that happen. But really, my main point is that even though we got to see Broly rebooted, I think that Cooler would have been the best choice in terms of all of the movie villains / characters to really reboot, just because of his connection to Frieza, and he already had a decent, you know, bit of personality to him. So I really feel like that'd work out very well. And like I said earlier, he's in Dragon Ball FighterZ as DLC, which was fairly recently, so that shows that he's still a pretty popular character with the fan base. I would say he must, you know, make Toei a lot of money still.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people would be open to the idea of Cooler being rebooted. Of course, I'm never usually like, just reboot this, reboot that. You know, I'm not usually on the reboot side, but...
Right. I feel like if they reboot him, they're just going to expect them to do everyone now, which they almost might make it a trope at that point.
Yeah, but with what they did with Broly, you know, in the Broly movie, I feel like if they can do it with that level of quality, with Toriyama really, like, bringing out the character, then I feel like it could be really good. Again, Toriyama did design Cooler, so I guess that it would make some sense for him to try and go back to a character that he did design in order for him to actually put his own spin on it. So overall, I would say that I think that rebooting Cooler would be a nice idea if it's done well. But would that take the form of movies or an arc? I'm not too sure. I feel like it'd almost take the form of an arc with him being like the central villain. But during either that arc or those movies, how exactly do you think that Cooler would be used, and how do you think that he should be used? Like, what's his main motivation? How is he introduced? And of course, like, what's he gonna do throughout? And, you know, of course, for fun, like we always try to do this, and make sure it is for fun, guys. How strong do you think Cooler would become in this story?
Oh lord. The really hard thing here, Mike, is that we can't use him the same exact way that they used him in the original film. You know, we're really far in the future in terms of, you know, timeline wise compared to where we were before. So I would think that they probably do it in a series. That would be the best. So have his own arc. I'll say this, I don't want them to redesign him at all. Do not touch his design. If you're gonna do anything, you can switch up his base form. Do not touch the final form design at all, please. I don't want any changes. But in terms of the actual story and how he would play out, like how they would introduce him, I feel like it would be something involving Frieza, since he is obviously alive right now. Like, Frieza's next big scheme is to take his brother, and maybe Cooler is already as strong as, you know, someone like Frieza, or stronger, and he didn't need to train. I don't know if they would do that necessarily, but they definitely would have to introduce him and play the story out very differently than what we saw in the film. Really, all they would kind of carry over is the fact that he is Frieza's brother, and he's a member of Frieza's race. Maybe he has different forms that we hadn't seen before, but it's tough because really Super is so far in the future to where it was in the original film.
Yeah, it's kind of of like a Resurrection F situation when you think about it like that, because, you know, if Resurrection F had taken place during like the time around the Cell Saga or even the Buu Saga, you know, it would have been a little more realistic for Frieza to be able to be a threat after he trained and, you know, things along those lines. So when you take somebody like Cooler, who realistically shouldn't be anywhere near as powerful as Frieza, and then you bring him into the story again and you try and make him like an actual threat to the Z Fighters, you're gonna need to put him through some like insane training, or at least you're gonna have to give like a good explanation, because with Broly, obviously he didn't have insane training, but he did have this built-in power that they kind of explained to allow him to fight on insane levels of power. But still, like, there's little issues here and there, so I'm not gonna expect them to have Cooler have like a completely perfectly logical power scaling system throughout the movie. But when it comes down to how they would use him, I think it would be interesting if they bring him in as someone who, you know, is kind of similar to his original run, where he's tired of his family being disrespected. He, like Frieza, is a supremacist who believes that they should reign over everything. Maybe he steps in, he's like, you know what, Frieza, you've shown that you're incompetent for far too long. You can't stop these Saiyans, so I'm going to show you how it's really done, you know. So maybe there'd be some one-upsmanship between the brothers. They could establish like a brotherly rivalry between Frieza and Cooler, and maybe, Josh, maybe we could see them fuse together. Maybe Frieza learn the fusion dance.
No thanks, because I've had enough trouble seeing him pop up a lot in Dokkan, so I don't really want to see that again.
So there definitely would be some interesting elements, and like you said before with touching his design, again, I think he had a really good design. Maybe the final form would change, because I'm not sure it's something that Toriyama himself would really go for, but I do think it'd be cool also if they introduce him like they did with Frieza or Frost, where he's in like his more constrained forms. I'd like to see what Cooler looks like when he's in that like shorter horned form, you know, or maybe his second form or even third form look different from Frieza's, because after all, they can change what their forms look like, although the writers haven't necessarily shown that level of creativity with somebody like Frost in the past. Maybe they'll do it here. But overall, I think that Cooler being rebooted would be a really interesting idea if done well, be it in a movie or be it in a arc of the series. How they would actually implement him is really up in the air right now. We gave our thoughts about this, so why don't you let us know down below in the comments what you think. If you're new to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. Check out Dragon Ball Nation in the end screen and description, and if you like this video, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.